In this video, we are going to learn about good file maintenance, and that means how to make groups and components in a model, how to name groups and components, and how to turn on and off groups of components for ease in rendering materials later on. So everybody's got a different method when they start to model. The best thing you can do, though, is to follow some really practical, common steps that you just repeat every time you model. And really, it's because they're considered good modeling practices, and it'll make your life so much easier if you can be consistent with this. The biggest thing is to be consistent. So this is just a general model that I've opened up that I've had in the past. And the reason I did that is because it's nice and organized. Okay. So what that means is we have what we can see from the outside. Sometimes they're not pretty from the outside because maybe that's not our focus. Like we can see the inside kind of guts of the window and overall, but from the inside, from the interior of the model, it probably looks just fine. But we're not going to be showing this part to our client. And so it doesn't matter if they're seeing something necessarily on the top of the ceiling that goes past the ceiling that we've created, as long as it meets the interior requirements. So that's the biggest thing, is just making sure that it all makes sense. But what we can see here is that in this model, you can see this list. And if you're not familiar, what do these mean? First, we have this content palette box, or there's lots of terms. I tend to say palette or dialog box. And this one is named entity info. And right now it says no selection because there's actually nothing selected on my screen. And then below that, we have tags. And another terminology that I myself might use interchangeably is called layers, because in so many different programs, such as AutoCAD and Revit and Photoshop, the common term is layers that we use to organize all the different, basically, layers that we're using to create our models. SketchUp in its recent versions has switched that terminology to tags. So please know that if I accidentally say layers or you hear it used by somebody else, tags and layers are really the same thing. You're tagging an item and identifying it and applying it to a layer, basically. So that's what it is. You're just giving it a name. Same thing with the layers. So what happens if I select this ceiling? Because this file is organized, when I select this, you can see that in the entity info, it automatically highlights that it's on the ceiling tag or the ceiling layer. And that way, down on this list, I can look and find ceiling. And you'll notice that there's some symbols. We have the name, and then we have an eyeball. Basically, this is when the eye, we can clearly see the eye is open, you can see. If I click that eyeball, I have essentially turned that layer off. And so visually, I no longer see the ceiling, which makes it easy because now I can see the interior of this model and work if I needed to add more to this. Say I was going to add furniture, or I was going to start building this fireplace here that needs to be rendered for the client. Maybe I wanted to make this great room and have a dining table and everything. Well, I need the ceiling off to be able to do that. But because the model is well organized, it only took me one click to get that ceiling. And you'll notice if I click on this ceiling, it highlights the whole ceiling, which is really nice because that means it's been grouped. It makes life easier. So if I turn that ceiling off, same thing, if I click on the exterior walls, we can see that these walls have been grouped, because if I click on this, it's not selecting just this end face, it selects the whole area of the walls because all of these have been grouped together. Say I need to make a change to this, that's easy to do because now I can just double click to go into edit mode. And if I want to draw something, and now that I'm in that edit mode, it will let me select individual faces and edges and make any changes that I need to. And then when I'm ready to close the group and get it back to being kind of sealed or locked up, I just click off of it. So a lot of times I'll just click outside the model, and that closes it up. And now if I just single click on it, it's back to being a group. Again, if you double click, that's when it goes into edit mode, and then you can see the bounding box around here. And that's what allows you to make changes. Because for example, if I just draw a rectangle on this wall and I was trying to push pull that through and using the push pull, you notice it's kind of flashing and it's not cutting through. And if I try to push pull, it's not going to do anything. Let me pull it outwards, but it's not going to cut through the wall like if I was trying to make a window, because it's a closed group. If I in fact want to cut through onto this, I need to actually go into edit mode and I need to draw that shape. Then I can take the push pull command and use that to actually push pull and affect a change to that wall. So it's remembering those things that make life easier, because a lot of times in the beginning you'll group and then later on you're like, okay, I want to cut through for the windows. And then you're trying to draw, and here you do a tape and you're like, oh, okay. And I'm going to get all those shapes in there and make the size that I need. And then I draw the rectangle that I need. And we think we're doing everything correct. And then it comes time to push pull and you're like, why won't it work? And it's just remembering that because we're working and keeping our items organized as we go through, that we've got to remember to go back into edit mode to change things once they've been grouped. Now, what's the difference between a group and a component? That's really important to really understand when it's appropriate to use a group versus a component. When I build walls and things like this, and ceilings and typically floors, those are typically always just a group, because I'm not necessarily trying to repeat these and have multiple entities of them. And a lot of times I just want to make changes or update. But what's the best thing about a component when we make those is a lot of times when we deal with furniture, accessories, lighting, when we want to have multiple instances of it. So for example, this bar stool, we can see that we have 3 of them in this. So say I want to change the color of the seat of the stool, but I want all 3 to change and not just the one. Because this is a component, if I go into edit mode and I open the paint bucket and I make sure that I'm in edit mode for this top of the seat, I can come over here to my palette, my materials palette. And right now I'm just in colors and model. I'm not anything special, but I can take this blue and make it active. And if I click on this, oh, it should in theory, let me change. Whoop. Let me make sure that I'm not leading you astray. Haha. So this was a model that I did not build. So I thought somebody had made this into a component. So this actually just completely derailed what I was saying. The benefit of this is it should have been a component. So actually this is a good fix because I have students do this. So I'm going to undo that and go back to how the chair looked before. Whoopsie. Sometimes we have to wait. My computer's just kind of hanging out there. I went a little too fast for it. So this is actually a perfect example of how to fix this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of move these off to the side. I'm going to just select and move that over here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to explode this one because I want it to be out in its own. And so I'm going to make sure I get all the pieces of it because the individual pieces are still. Make sure I get everything. And that leg, and make sure I get everything underneath. That's important because you got to get all those pieces too. And so what I'm going to do is now, I think I have everything. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to say make component. And I'm going to call this a bar stool. And I'm not going to glue to anything. And I'm going to replace the selection with the component. And I'm going to say create. So now we know this one is a component. And so what I'm going to do now is I am going to make copies of this. So I'm going to activate the move command M as a shortcut, or I could come over here to the move. And then I'm going to hit the option key. I think on the PC it would be Alt. So I'm going to hit the option and I'm going to make a couple copies. And so now those are copies of that component. So let's see if it'll make the changes this time if I go into edit mode. Yes. Okay. Because this time when I went into edit mode and I changed the color, because this is a component and not a group, now what it's doing is, this is the benefit, is because now rather than having to go in and change each one of these chairs, because I just edited the one version of it, and because it's a component, it will edit all instances or entities of this chair. So again, that's the big difference, is this one's a group. So if I go into edit mode and apply a new color to it, it's not going to impact this chair, even though they look exactly the same, because they were made a group instead of a component. So this is a perfect example of why it's sometimes better to make components. And again, the kind of the difference in know when and why is walls, floors, ceilings, things that you're not going to have necessarily multiple instances of. Those all work really well as a group. It's furniture, accessories, things like that, that work better as a component. If you're doing architectural elements on the ceiling, that can be a little different. So for example, if I was doing a coffered ceiling or an angled ceiling in this great room, I would potentially want to make the beams a component, because there's going to be multiple instances of them. And so if I paint one beam brown or apply a wood texture, it would be nice if it applies it to all of those beams and not just the one. And I don't have to individually go and touch every one of them. A window like this, almost always you want to be a component. So for example, this student made it a group. So in reality, these should have been, let's see. Okay, it is a component, but then they grouped all the windows together, but individually. So let's see if I change something about this window. Let's see if I change the frame, and you can see that this is highlighted. It's highlighting all the windows. So if I make all the frames this kind of color right here, it's a little weird, but you can see that it is now changed all instances of that. So perfect. And then if you want to be able to just click on one window and affect all of them in the sense of like they're all selected, a lot of times we can group them, because now I can just go hide and it hides, it's grouped into the walls. So that there's multi-layers to that. You can have groups within groups, just like this is. So the windows are a group within the wall group. And then, but then once we get far enough in, we can find out that the window itself is actually a component and go into that edit mode and affect that. So how do we organize this? I'm going to close out the palette or the materials bucket. So the biggest thing is in addition to components and groups, is we want to make sure our layers stay really organized. Like right now, I can just immediately click the ceiling to turn that off and get it out of my way. And as I look at this, if I click on just these cabinets right here, sorry, again, my computer is spinning the wheel of death. Okay, when I click on this area, I can see that it is located on the tag cabinets fridge, because sometimes I don't want to put all the cabinets on the same layer. I'll have like base cabinets, fridge cabinets, or pantry wall, because the kitchen might be complex and there's a lot. The island is often its own setup. And then things like this with plates, accessories, books, that's what we call entourage or accessories. Those you definitely want to have on their own layer. So for example, I have kitchen accessories, and when I click that, they all turn off. And the benefit of that is those tend to be lots of faces and edges, complex curves, and because they're showing so much detail, like you can see that this looks like oats and flour. But the problem is depending on how powerful your computer is, these may or may not really lag and make your model start going really slow. So oftentimes, I mean, you must wait until the very end to put this stuff in. This kitchen actually has quite a bit of entourage, which adds a lot of depth and fun to this cabinetry. It shows that you as the designer want these to be glass, and maybe the client has this beautiful vase collection that you're particularly designing these cabinets to show off. And then, so that's perfect for this to show that off. But when you're just doing general modeling, we don't need to see all that, and it causes problems. So really save that for last. Get the cabinets, get the walls, the flooring, and everything built up and organized, and by layer, and then by grouping or components, and it'll make life so much simpler. So again, kitchen accessories tend to be on one. I tend to have one for lighting. So I can now, because this is all really nice and organized, I can go cabinets fridge, cabinets island, cabinets upper. Let's do cabinets base. Then we can see all the appliances and plumbing are still there. So I can go find, that's got a layer, appliances and plumbing. We can see wall backsplash, because we want that separate from our actual wall, because often we're trying to do a material in just a very particular area. So you can notice it's not impacting all the rest of the walls. And so again, if I click on this, this is grouped, and this would not be one we would make a component of. We would make a group of a backsplash, but it's separate from the walls because the walls are their own group. So walls backsplash, walls interior, walls exterior. I can go down here to window, bar stools. Now, this one, because it doesn't have a lot of furniture yet, we could just keep that as bar stools. But again, if we were going to be doing multiple furniture, you could create a folder and go bedroom furniture, living room furniture. But right now, in the sake of simplicity, I just have bar stools. But you could absolutely like organize it by room, or just have a general layer called furniture, where it'll turn off all furniture at once. If I had doors, then we would put them on the door layer. Right now, there's no doors in here. Flooring. And then you'll notice at the bare minimum, the very last one that I haven't turned off is the floor plan. If you've imported it, you might have built your model directly just from scratch, or more often than not, I'm always building off of an image, or such as a JPEG or a PNG, or actually I typically import my CAD plans, and I find that to be the easiest way. This is my favorite way to model because it's so nice. I can just have the floor plan imported. I can draw that first rectangle, it locks on. You can see that it gives me snap points to it. And then I can easily pull up the wall to the height I need. So like if I had 10-foot ceilings, I can just pull that up to 10 feet. The biggest thing that you want to do though, before you start modeling on top of it, if you have brought in a CAD plan, is make sure that floor plan is grouped so that you don't have individual lines and pieces that could stick to the geometry that you're going to make. So this one is grouped. It's been applied to the floor plan layer. And so, and now I can start working on it, and I can literally just take my pull this across and use my guides to snap to that wall and really easily build this out. And I know that's vertical and straight because I can see the blue guide, and I can come and keep going around. And this is exterior walls. So I like to do all the exterior walls at once. And you want to make sure you're snapping to the correct points. Don't get in, zoom in, and don't be afraid to go in. Whoop. Again, kind of froze up on me. 1 second. Okay, I'm on the edge. Now I can pull that across. And you just determine what is relevant to your model. If you're modeling this whole upstairs, then we're going to end up drawing all the walls. If you're only modeling a portion, then figure out what you actually need to see and what you don't. So now I can just delete that one little line. I have all the exterior walls, and then maybe I go ahead and cut the holes for the windows, or I just hide the floor plan, triple click, and then right click and say make group. And now I could apply that to the exterior, or to the walls exterior. And then I could turn that floor plan back on, and I could start building up the interior walls. I have a random little face here. So I could start right there, or I could delete that and start fresh with my own. But basically, I'm just going to build on top of this and so on. So I keep mine really organized from step one so that I really don't have to worry about fixing things as I go along. So I'm going to stop this video right here, and I'm going to show you a part 2 of what happens if you get a file or you realize, oh, I wasn't very good about keeping everything as organized as I should. And now you need to kind of go back and fix things. You absolutely can do that. It sometimes can be a little trickier, but sometimes it's best to just take some time, stop, and organize the file before you start applying all the materials. So I'll do that in this kind of like a little addendum video.